photos.
Philip Kitcher wrote a book many years ago called Abusing Science, the Case Against Creationism. In that particular book, he claimed that if solid evidence of humans and dinosaurs were discovered, that it would shake the foundation of the evolutionary theory. I want you to remember that quote, that it would shake the foundations of the evolutionary theory, because we're going to look at some evidence that's going to do just that.
Okay, so Harrub's intentions are to shake the foundations of evolution and possibly cause some folks to no longer view the theory as valid. That seems more divisive than scientific, but let's get into it anyway. The first thing he did here was a combination of quote mining and making an appeal to authority. Unfortunately for Harrub, he selected a quote from Philip Kitcher, a man who does not specialize in evolutionary biology or paleontology, but who is rather a very respected professor of scientific philosophy, whose focus is not in carrying out repeated testing and observations to try and secure a body of knowledge with predictable utility, but instead focuses on the assumptions regarding the social and sometimes metaphysical implications that the use of science may have. There are many in the scientific community who do not bother with this topic due to scientific philosophy and the various fields of science being two separate disciplines with very different procedures. Now, if you were to ask an evolutionary biologist what kind of impact the discovery of humans living with dinosaurs would have on the theory of evolution, you would get a different answer. Assuming, of course, they can get over the absurdity of the question itself. They may point to the occurrence of living prehistoric animals that have survived mass extinction events. The continuation of these animals have not compromised the theory of evolution in the least, though their existence may be a determining factor in which species appear to be dominant over another. Just as a side note, something that may be of interest are the issues that were at hand when Kitcher wrote his book, Abusing Science, and they directly pertain to the specific passage that Harrub had cited. In his book, Kitcher addresses what had happened at the Paluxy riverbed. There are remarkably preserved dinosaur tracks that were first unearthed by the forces of erosion. According to some creationists, there are human footprints from the same time period alongside the dinosaur tracks. During dry spells, when the waterline recedes, the footprints are blatantly visible. According to some locals and creationists, the appearance of human footprints is obvious. These quote-unquote human footprints did not withstand scientific analysis. It was quickly determined that the appearance was due to the natural process of attrition and mud collapse. This caused the three toes of the bird-like dinosaurs, which did not penetrate as deeply and leave a sizable widthwise gap, to vanish first. This gave the remainder of the dinosaur's foot, which sank deeper, leaving a broader imprint in the riverbed, a striking human-like quality in some cases. This fact is still shrugged off by many creationists. I can see a human footprint in these photos, and I think I know who left them. No, not you, Ronald McDonald, but this guy. But everything I know about experimentation, observation, and empirical evidence tells me these are not the footprints of man. But with a subjective mindset, I can see how they can be confused, if not deliberately misconstrued, as human footprints. We should know better than to look at something that has been thoroughly explained through rigorous testing, only to opt for a more personal interpretation to justify our pet beliefs and worldview. I should mention that Harrub did not refer to the Paluxy River tracks after deploying the excerpt from Kitcher's book. I am simply bringing up this issue for the purpose of illustrating this young Earth creationist's line of reasoning, which he uses when he reviews evidence. His logic is identical to that of the individuals who have seen the Paluxy tracks and jump to the conclusion that there are human prints present. This is simply picking your information in an attempt to lead the evidence to a conclusion that has already been decided, instead of letting the evidence reveal the truth of whatever topic is in dispute. Though this is a common practice in the political arena, it is essentially worthless in any field of science. With that being said, let's listen to some more of Harrub's claims. You may be able to recognize some very blinkered tendencies as he attempts to put together a compelling argument.
Or maybe somebody could explain to me the dinosaur figurines from Acambaro, Mexico.
Dinosaur figurines? I can already feel my inner child getting excited.
If you were to go there today, there's a mountain called El Toro, the bull. And it's at the foothills of that particular mountain that a gentleman, he was riding on the back of a horse, and from that elevated position, he saw the first of these ceramic figurines. Now, all told, they found roughly 30,000 of these. And again, many of them so well detailed, you can actually tell what kind of dinosaur it is.
Yeah, this one is obviously a Mierdatorosaurus.
Ironically, they sent these pieces of these dinosaurs off to two laboratories here in the United States to try to have them dated. They want to know, how old are these things? So they sent 8 additional samples to be what's called thermoluminescent tested. They really wanted to make sure they had this thing right. Sure enough, it came back with dates of roughly 2000 BC as well. It was at that point that they called both laboratories. They said, hey, you know that material we're sending you? It came from dinosaur figurines. At which point, both laboratories did the same thing. They withdrew their results. They said, we're sorry, we're unable to give you any accurate readings on your material.
Although I fail to see the irony that Harrub had mentioned in this situation, Harrub can throw around fancy words like thermoluminescence and possibly fool a few folks into believing this asinine bilge. But for people who know a thing or two about dating materials in order to authenticate primitive ceramic ware, Harrub will not have a foothold. Thermoluminescent dating involves the measurement of an accumulated radiation dose in order to determine the time that had passed since the crystalline minerals were heated, such as in ceramics, lava, and in the case of sediments when they were last exposed to sunlight. What Harrub neglects to mention in his video is that at the time when these figurines were initially dated, thermoluminescence was still in its infancy. With this dating method, it is presupposed that there was an event in the history of the material where heating removes the pre-existing trapped electrons, which then sets the thermoluminescence signal to 0. And then as time goes on, the ionizing radiation field causes the electrons to accumulate, which is then measurable in a laboratory. However, this is in of itself insufficient in finding the time since the zeroing event. There is another series of steps which involve finding the accumulated radiation dose rate per year before the material can be accurately dated. This is accomplished by factoring the amount of alpha radioactivity, which would come from the uranium and thorium content along with the potassium content, as K40 is a beta and gamma emitter. But it doesn't stop there. The cosmic ray dose is also included in current thermoluminescence. Afterward, when the contents of the radiation field have been determined, the amount of radiation is divided by the accumulated dose per year to obtain the time since the zeroing event. The zeroing event being whenever the liquid lava began to cool and solidify, or when a sediment layer had last seen the light of day, or in this case, when the clay was popped into whatever kiln that was used to bake the ceramics. Just another tidbit that Harrub failed to mention. When these figurines underwent this dating method, it did put them at around 2500 BC. After thermoluminescence became more refined and perfected, it placed these figurines at 30 years prior to 1969. If you want it simplified further, the lack of dirt caked into the crevices of these figures, along with the lack of worn surfaces on the broken fragments, also sent up red flags for scientists. It was also suspicious that the thousands of figurines were mostly intact, and even the broken ones had accompanying pieces that fit perfectly. When uncovering artifacts which are genuinely ancient in their origin, this is very unlikely to happen. which is why findings such as tombs, which remain untouched for thousands of years, that house intact artifacts, tend to be so high profile and attract a lot of attention. There is a reason an archaeologist's face will light up like a kid on Christmas morning when they find a complete relic. So what's the deal? How did it go from this guy on his horse stumbling upon a curious object to him coming into possession of thousands of silly knickknacks? How could this have happened? It's not like he had done anything as reckless as sending word that he would pay any local farmers a peso for each figurine that they would bring to him. Oh, dang. That is exactly what he did. Poor fella. Inadvertently created his own tourist trap and fell into it. Unlike Harrub's literal interpretation of the Genesis account, science has the benefit of being self-correcting. Let's consider Albert Einstein, who with his works and research favored the concept of a static universe. But when Edwin Hubble came along and was clearly able to demonstrate the galaxies were not only distancing themselves from one another, but were also drawing closer in some cases, he adhered to the scientific process and accepted that the universe was expanding. Retractions and testing with tendencies are common practice. This is the reason thermoluminescent dating, along with other methods of dating, have improved over the decades and are reliable. There is no shame in admitting that an accurate reading was not available, given the experimentation at the time. It's all part of the process. So let's check back with Harrub and find out what conclusions he has drawn from this ordeal. And keep in mind that he is still going with the dating results from the initial thermoluminescence testing on this one, regardless of the advancements in thermoluminescence testing in the decades since.
Came back with dates of roughly 2000 BC. 2000 BC. That would imply that men had been living with the dinosaurs.
For the sake of Harrub's argument, let's pretend that these knickknacks are from the year 2000 BC. So Harrub thinks that humans needed to have seen something in order to replicate the shape out of clay, and that any primitive art that slightly resembles dinosaurs could only have been made because the ancient artists lived alongside dinosaurs. We can add these two claims to Harrub's growing rap sheet of stupidulations. With Harrub's logic, the same can be said about a future society who not until the year 2175 made first contact with an extraterrestrial race. But the slower individuals of the future society are thinking that they have substantial evidence to claim that mankind must have met extraterrestrials in the 20th century because a film in 1996 clearly depicted aliens.
Welcome to Earth.